talk about Mexicans? I mean, you already answered.
Yeah, I really don't think it's a racial conversation. It's something beyond that. Again, with the United States being alongside the same border with Mexico, Mexico and the United States getting into wars, various skirmishes, and now this illegal immigration debate. It's not so simple as being about race. It's something else. I would say it's more nationalistic, and it's always been easy to attribute, or not. It's always easier to fight wars, whether they be with actual real wars or just wars of thought, if you have a racialized enemy saying, browns versus whites or whatever. But I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
All right. What do you guys think? What questions do you have for Gustavo?
Let's go to Lou.
Thanks. What percentage of your peers are happy for your success versus resentful of your success? And how do you deal with peers that you have to be around who resent your success?
The question was, why were you guys able to hear in the back? Okay, so I don't have to repeat it. I could only answer that question based on the emails that I get or the reaction that I get when people meet me. And the vast majority, based just on that alone, the vast majority of my peers, Latinos like myself, they're supportive of the column. They say, this is the funniest column. Thank you for being a voice against racism, or even that, just for explaining our culture a little bit more. Of course, that doesn't mean my peers really agree with it, because maybe the people who don't like the column, they just won't even respond to me. And how do I deal with people who don't like the column?
I mean writers. Writers. You know how jealous writers are. So I'm wondering if maybe even more of your friends are jealous of your writer friends. How do you deal with your fellow writers and your success?
I could speak on that actually very personally, because that actually happened at the OC Weekly. I'm sure some of you heard about the travails of the OC Weekly this past year with the takeover of the New Times, which is now Village Voice Media, with 3/4 of the staff of the OC Weekly leaving. When the LA Times, they did a column 1 on me back in last year, February of last year, apparently people were talking behind my back, going up to my former managing editor, Matt Coker, and saying, Gustavo's getting a big head, you need to talk to Gustavo. And I only found out about this after Matt Coker wrote an article for the Sacramento News and Review, where he's now the editor there, that my own editor, the guy who actually thought up of the idea for Ask a Mexican, Will Swain, he went up to Matt and basically was upset about the column 1, that it wasn't going to credit him for creating the column, even though I didn't say that. I've always been very upfront. Will Swain, created the idea for the column. And I think the worst part about it, though, a colleague of mine, when Will announced that I got a 2-book deal with Scribner, she started crying. She admitted, I'm just so jealous of Gustavo, I'm just going to start crying and have a hissy fit about it. And it was uncomfortable. It's like, what do you want me to do? I'm getting all this attention, sure, based on the media, also based on my hard work. If you guys were doing it, I'd be ecstatic. Nick Scow, you actually interviewed him, Luke, for your blog. When Nick got his book deal to write a book about the dead journalist Gary Webb, I was ecstatic. I was happy. We all applauded him. We were all happy for him. That didn't happen with me. The only thing I could do is just continue to work. And now, with the new staff at the Weekly, they've been appreciative. They've been supportive. But I guess that's just the nature of journalism. If somebody's more successful than you, you just grind your teeth and figure, why didn't I do this?
Did you lose any friends, writer friends, because you became successful?
No. The friends that I do have, the friends that besides probably the people who did go over to the District Weekly, we don't really talk anymore, unfortunately. And it's really unfortunate, because I worked with those folks for 5 years. I don't appreciate, especially after what Matt Coker wrote, I don't appreciate people talking behind my back. If you're jealous about me, just tell me. Tell me you're jealous. Tell me if I'm getting a big head. Please tell me. But in terms of the friends that current friends that I have, no. They make fun of me. They're like, oh, now you're on this show, you're on that show, you're going to get too big for us. I'm like, no, I'm just a Mexican. I was going to use an Orange County slur, but you guys wouldn't get it. So,
Buster, please.
I have a question on behalf of my grandson, who is half Lakota Indian. And the question is, why did Mexicans give up your Indian heritage to become Spanish, when you could have just as easily given up your Indian heritage and become French?
Indian heritage and become French because of the takeover of France during the 1860s?
Well, France conquered that area.
Yeah, for a while.
As the Spanish did.
the Spaniards, when they came into Mexico, they slaughtered a bunch of people, then they raped a bunch of women, and so they imposed their own culture on the Indians. If you try to celebrate your Indian heritage, you were, brutally attacked, and it started slowly but surely, and they just spread across Mexico. Really, Mexico as a country wasn't conquered by if you want to call it the Spanish heritage of Mexico or whatever, until the 1900s, when the Yaqui Indians of Sonora, close to the Arizona border, they were vanquished in the early 1900s, and they were finally subjugated. In fact, resistance to the Spaniards, it's still happening down in Oaxaca. The whole thing in Chiapas, it was just basically a response by the indigenous people in Chiapas left there to, go against what they consider to be the oppressors, the Spaniards, even though they're all Mexicans. Me personally, I see Mexico as the confluence of both of the cultures. You have the Spanish culture and the Indian culture. And the Indian culture, rather to me, let me take that back. To me, my history doesn't, as a Mexican, as a person of Mexican descent, it doesn't start until 1492, when Columbus, came into America. I don't care about my Spanish heritage. I don't go research Fernandad and Isabella and the Reconquista that happened in Spanish. I don't care about that. Similarly, I don't really pay much attention to the Indian heritage of Mexico. I mean, no more so than anything else. I think it's great. I think history is great as all. But to me, my history would be Mexican history. And what exactly is Mexican history? What exactly is Mexican heritage? I talked earlier about how Mexicans, they listen to music that sounds like polkas and waltzes. Well, that came about because of German and Czech immigrants who came to Mexico.
Texas.
Texas, exactly. The whole accordion thing, it was all Czech immigrants who came here, and then the Oompa bands were German immigrants who went to Sinaloa. Tacos al pastor, I'm sure if you're here in Southern California, you've had that. That comes from Lebanese immigrants who came to Central Mexico, Puebla, and Mexico City. They brought their shawarma, the heritage of the shawarma, and they basically made it into tacos. Mariachi, or even better than that, whole quinceañera thing, sure, that was a Spanish thing. But if you go to a quinceañera, there's always going to be the same thing, a waltz. We got the waltz from the French when they conquered Mexico. Me personally, I'm not going to reduce Mexican heritage to an Indian heritage and a Spanish heritage. It's just like the United States. It's multicultural. That's what I embrace. To me, that's what my Mexican heritage is. It's multicultural, just like my American heritage. That's also multicultural.
But you speak Spanish.
I do speak Spanish. If I wanted to speak the Indian language, which language would I speak? My ancestors, if I wanted to go based on the ancestors that I had, they weren't Aztecs. I wouldn't speak Nahuatl. I would speak whatever the Chichimeca spoke, and I don't know what language they speak. And yeah, I would like to learn it, just like I would like to learn any other language. So.
Yes. Who are your favorite non-Mexican comedy stars?
Who are my favorite non-Mexican comedy stars? Dave Chappelle, Richard Pryor, Stephen Colbert. I'm a big fan of satire, satirists, because that's really what I try to do. In terms of stand-up, Dave Chappelle's a genius to me. Carlos Mencia, I like him, even though I don't think he's necessarily a funny guy, but he's a great comedian in that he rankles you. He gets people upset. He makes people viscerally react to what he has to say. I could appreciate that in terms of what other people.
How about George Lopez? No.
George Lopez is funny. Sorry, I forgot about him. He's a really funny guy.
And is he important? He's kind of the Mexican in a weird sort. In comedy, right?
Well, you could say that about Paul Rodriguez too. But before him, I guess. George Lopez, he's a really, really funny guy. And I've actually only just started to see the George Lopez show, because George Lopez's comedy as a stand-up, it's very Chicano-oriented. I think he's funny as is. People could appreciate him, but he's much more funnier if you understand the cultural heritage that he's talking about, the anecdotes and all that. I think many more that Chicanos or people of Mexican heritage can relate to that, to people who are not that. But the George Lopez show, as I said, I started seeing it recently, and it's actually a very funny show. I was surprised at how funny it was, and also how it could just go all across. But then, who's the other guy? He used to host Fear Factor. Joe Rogan. Very, very funny guy. Very obscene, but very funny.